Hey, everybody. Welcome into an all-new episode of Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And I'm Nick Zaveri.
On the program today, the major news of last week. Nick, we didn't even get a chance to talk about it. We're going to talk about it in our first segment. President Biden, former President Trump have set dates to debate coming up in June and September. Nick, are going to break this down, this unprecedented debate that's happening well before the conventions, the media's role in setting all of this up. Should more candidates have been invited to this thing? Nick and I are going to get into it in just a sec. Plus, later on in the program, Nick Troiano, the executive director over at Unite America and author of The Primary Solution, Rescuing Our Democracy from the Fringes. What a title, Nick. Jeez. But Nick is going to come on the program, explain all about what they do over at Unite America and how to solve this issue of this polarization that we're seeing in Congress. Simple solution, you would think, right? Nick outlines it in the book, and it's some of the work that they're doing over at Unite America. So more on that in just a second with Nick. Some housekeeping notes before I say hello to Nick. All new episode of the Double Jab podcast is out there over on leonmedianetwork.com or listen wherever you get your pods. This week, Rich interviews legendary trainer Bob Santos. He's got the Barrientos twins on the program. All of this is in conjunction with the work Leon Media Network is doing with Box Lab Promotions and the big fight happening May 31st at the Caribbean Royale Orlando Hotel. Get your tickets at Ticketmaster.com or click the link in our show notes for a discount on tickets. And also, you can watch the fights exclusively on DAZN. Download the DAZN app. If you don't know what that is, then you don't know boxing, because Canelo Alvarez fights on DAZN. Everybody seems to fight on DAZN. So go check out all new episodes of the Double Jab podcast out there over on LeonMediaNetwork.com or listen wherever you get your pods. And speaking of shows on Leon Media Network, everyone knows my co-host Moonlights on another show. And this week, an all-new episode of the Educate US podcast is out there. You guys did a really good episode this week because on the program joining them was Lori Heisler, who's been working in education for 20 years. But more importantly, she serves for the local chapter of Moms Demand Action, which is an organization that focuses on ending gun violence through responsible gun ownership and advocating for stronger gun laws to ensure the safety of everyone. And she's based in Tennessee. We all know about that school shooting that happened in Tennessee. You want to go check out that episode of the Educate US podcast. Listen to it over on LeonMediaNetwork.com or wherever you get your pods. All right. Now I say hello. Actually, before I say hello to you, Nick, and you can chime in here too if you want, because this is the first time this has kind of ever happened to me and probably to the show. You and I, when we first started recording, I want to say a couple episodes in, we had a mutual friend pass away that we both knew really well, but we didn't know that each of us knew him. You know what I'm saying? And so it was our friend Greg that had passed away, who was a podcaster as well, and part of a group that Nick was a part of. And then I happened to play basketball with him all the time. Well, this time, some news came out over the weekend of somebody that passed away that's a pretty notable political commentator on CNN. So take a listen to this.
We have some very sad news to report to you, and I'm very sorry that I have to tell you this. CNN political commentator and Republican strategist Alice Stewart has passed away. Many of you know her. She's been a staple on this network, participating in many political panels, bringing us deep insight into politics. You'll remember she was a former communications director for Senator Ted Cruz. She worked with Mitt Romney and Rick Santorum, Michelle Bachmann, just to name a few. She also hosted a podcast with her friend and Democratic strategist Maria Cardona called Hot Mics from Left to Right.
So you heard there Alice Stewart, passing away at the age of 58. It's a little tough for me because I happen to know Alice personally. Alice was actually supposed to be on our program. Nick, if you recall, I had texted you a while back after I had done a panel with her, gotten her information. We kind of hit it off, and she was going to come on the program, obviously, to talk a little bit more as we get into, the campaign starting up here in the summer months. And we had her scheduled to come on probably, I think it was next month or in July that she was going to be coming on. And she was obviously, her and I were going to be doing some stuff around the conventions as well for the RNC and DNC in July. And, cause of death unknown. This is an incredibly tragic situation because if you know Alice, like again, and I don't want to sit here and pretend like I've known her for forever. I've known her for like 3 or 4 months, but I've done a couple panels with her, and we follow each other on social. I know she was an avid jogger. She would go out for morning runs where she lived out there in Virginia, and it sounds like something happened on the run of the runs where she passed away. No foul play was reported by the police or anything like that. So it was nothing nefarious, but don't know cause of death or anything like that. But I mean, she was just on TV the day before on Wolf Blitzer's show, which is on, at 5, 6 p.m. in the afternoon. So clearly she was fine up until the day before. So my thoughts and prayers go out to her family. But this is the first time I've ever had somebody kind of, in my orbit that's now like I've yelled at from my TV and then gone on TV with them and now befriended them. And, you heard some of the names there, Nick, of some of the people she worked with. And immediately, if you're, on the left, you would probably roll your eyes. You'd probably be like, I'd never talk to this person. Why would I? Ted Cruz? Are you kidding me? Michelle Bachmann? Come on, give me a break. But then when I met Alice in the green room at CNN, so endearing, so welcoming, wanting to learn more about what you and I were doing, the show structure. You heard there in the clip that she was doing a show with her friend who's a Democratic strategist and worked for Hillary Clinton's campaign. She was trying to do kind of what we're doing, Nick, trying to add to the discourse, not get into, all of these buzzwords and phrases. And I really relished my time having talked with her, just the way she took her time to say, I don't know who this guy is. Come over here, let's chat, let me learn more about you. Following me on social media and stuff like that. We just conversed afterwards. I had just talked to her the week before, prior to, again, trying to schedule her coming on the program. And it's a, for me, the reason why I'm bringing it up at the top of the show is this is kind of what Nick and I's aims were around this show, right? Adding to the discourse, but like being able to, it's not so much get along with the other side, but just have conversations with people, like normal conversations. The sky is blue, the sun is yellow. Okay. Whether or not it's too hot or too cloudy, we can get into, but we got to start at the facts at the beginning. And I think Alice exemplified that from the few times, again, that I spoke with her. And again, I did a 3-hour panel with her after Super Tuesday. So you can go watch it over on our YouTube channel. So, like, I'm on TV with her, disagreeing with her in real time, because at that time, Trump had given a speech that, Alice was interpreting one way and, I was interpreting the opposite way. So I just wanted to, give a shout out to her and rest in peace to her and just her families. I feel really bad about this, but it's the first time it's happened to us where my TV life, Nick, has crossed over into here due to somebody passing away. And when I saw the news, I was really heartbroken, because here's somebody that's trying to add to the discourse, and it was kind of doing what we're doing at a little bit of a higher scale, Sirius XM radio show and stuff like that. Not that we're not at a higher scale, but so just salute to her. But how are you doing outside of all of that? And do you have any thoughts on, because I know you watch a lot of CNN as well, so I'm sure you're familiar with who Alice was, and how are you doing?
Yeah, like you, just I remember I hear the news. I heard it through you, and just when you and I were talking about it, and just how hard it hit you, and I just felt awful. You know, it's been an interesting year. It's only May, and personally for me, there's already been a few people who have passed away. So your news over the weekend, it just added to that list. I like what you said about the kind of people that we have on this show. Alice represents those kinds of folks. I mean, I think there's a conceit that we have on our program about that we truly believe that we can have intelligent conversations about politics and social issues with quality people, people who do want to have that have good intentions in these conversations, are willing to hear other perspectives but are not being disingenuous. And she was one of those she was one of those proper voices at CNN. I think for many of us, on the left or whatever, you hear conservative commentator and you automatically think, well, wait, like, am I going to necessarily agree with this person? She was a human being. Yeah, and she put herself out there as a reasonable person, regardless of her politics. Because you could look at her resume and say, well, look who she wrote speeches for and blah, blah, blah. And our hope is that on this show that, regardless of your political persuasion, there are people that are worth listening to. You don't have to agree with them, but there's someone you should at least hear out. And we've tried to make it a point on this show to have only those kinds of people on. So Alice would have absolutely been the kind of person that would fit the mold of a guest at Can We Please Talk. But beyond her passing, no, yeah, I mean, all is good here. And again, I feel bad for you, and obviously your connection with her. And I feel the same way for those of the network. Just again, she was trying to fight the good fight, trying to bring reasonable political discourse, and at a time now where that is just, and I think we may get into this a little bit about what's going on in Congress and the exchanges there. There's a lack of civility in the way we talk about politics as Americans at this point, and it's coming up too often. And I thought Alice was a helpful corrective to that, and her loss is felt.
Yep, I couldn't agree more, man. I again, like, in terms of how nice she was, not only on air but off air. And again, you can go back and watch some of the clips of her and I doing a couple different panels. But like, even on that panel, Bakari Sellers was on there, again, Democratic, former South Carolina representative. Obviously, two people that couldn't be more diametrically opposed in terms of viewpoints, and she got along with everybody, man. So she will be missed. All right, let's shift into our first topic, because you were just talking about political discourse. Well, get ready for some political discourse, Nick, because June 27th, Thursday, CNN is going to have the first presidential debate that's going to be happening. Jake Tapper, Dana Bash are going to be moderating. Obviously, everyone that's familiar with our show knows that we happen to know Mr. Tapper, and he's been on this program before. So kudos to him for landing this, and kudos to CNN for landing this, or maybe not kudos. Nick is going to tell you in a second. Maybe it's not kudos for them landing this, but also the second debate will be in September for ABC News, where David Muir will be moderating that debate. And again, both of these debates are going to be happening outside of the traditional norms that are normally followed for the presidential debate and the committee that puts these on. Take a listen.
I just want to say that I've invited Biden to debate. He can do it anytime he wants, including tonight.
Well, make my day, pal. I'll even do it twice.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Republican rival Donald Trump have agreed to face off in 2 debates for the presidential election. Tens of millions of Americans will be tuning in live, and it'll be high risk for both sides in a tight race with low enthusiasm from voters.
So, Nick, obviously in 2020, one of the debates got canceled. And obviously Trump had COVID after one of them, if you recall, or during one of them. And then that kind of led to the subsequent cancellation of one of the third debates. And after that first debate that they did, where Chris Wallace moderated at the time when he was working at Fox News, a lot of pushback and a lot of people saying we need to have mics that are muted for this. We need to have, moderators that are both picked by, each other's group. Like, there's a commonality in terms of who the moderator will be and who we're picking there. Do we do it in front of a studio audience? Do we do it in front of a theater with people in there to be able to hear crowd noise? Or do we just do it with nobody around and just the anchors? And so all of that is going to come to a head June 27th at the Atlanta studios for CNN. Like I mentioned, Jake Tapper, Dana Bash moderating. No crowd will be there. Just the 2 candidates, none of the third-party candidates like RFK Jr. or even some of the other parties like Joe Stein or Cornel West or even the Libertarian candidate. None of them will be on this debate stage. The Biden campaign was very adamant that they just wanted Trump versus Biden, and they wanted to do it before the conventions. Obviously, in July will be the first convention. The RNC will be happening in Milwaukee that week of July 15th through the 18th. And the DNC will be happening in August in Chicago. Nick and I, well, maybe Nick, I know I will be at Freedom Fest in July 11th in Las Vegas. There we'll be having a debate. The Free and Equal Elections Foundation that is working in conjunction with Nick and I, they are putting on a series of debates. July 11th is their next one, where we expect, and invites have been sent to former President Trump, current President Biden, but also RFK, Cornel West, Jill Stein, the Libertarian candidate, the Socialist Party candidate, a true inclusive debate of all of these candidates. We expect a lot of people there, a lot of network coverage there. It will be airing live on Scripps, and C-SPAN will be re-airing it as well. So you can go check that out. But high level for you, Nick, what did you make of when you heard this? You were texting me, hey, this is outside of what we normally do here. And I said to you, it's the age of Trump. Up is down, right is left. Like whatever order we were going in before, we're not doing that anymore. What'd you make of, and what was the first thing you thought of when you heard that these debates were announced, these two debates happening on CNN and ABC?
Yeah, I was just frustrated by it because, I am a fan of American history. And it's not even being a fan of American history, it's a fan of our political process. So, yes, and I haven't looked at the delegate numbers you have. So probably by all means, these two guys have locked up their respective party nominations.
Correct.
That being said, if you're the DNC or the RNC, part of the reason you have that convention is to rally party support in an effort to unify the party. Because in the case of both candidates, at least this time around, neither party's 100% enthralled with them. So to jump ahead of the conventions, and maybe this is just me being an old man, hearing all this or seeing this play out and say, well, you had a convention. Like, what was the purpose of that? Like, this is almost like releasing, it's almost like talking about the playoffs or having a playoff schedule before you even play any games in the regular season. So this happens. And of course, I'm asking questions about process. And, the cynic in me, who's always, at least since college, always kind of wondered about the dangers of television's relationship with politics. We see it play out. Mike, obviously you've been in, you are a part of this world. So, you're not really cynical, you're more practical. And I think that's the fundamental difference of the way we both reacted. Like, you looked at this and like, of course this would happen. To me, I'm the hopeless romantic here that just says this is ridiculous. The other side, and I think where this works against both candidates, is what that debate signifies is that every suspicion that you have from people who are third-party supporters, or not even a third-party supporter, just someone who's frustrated with the Democrats and Republicans, they look at this and they see that it's only two people on that stage, and this confirms suspicions that we saw even as early as 2016, when Hillary Clinton had won the Democratic nomination. Now, obviously, that was legitimate. Like, she won the nomination. But supporters of Bernie Sanders brought up at the time, like, this felt like this was set up for her to win anyway. Like, our votes weren't going to matter. Well, go ahead and take that sentiment and expand on it. And now you have voters who are on the fence of RFK Jr., people who may return back to being Jill Stein supporters. You and I met the socialist candidates at the I forget the name of the organization. It was Free and Equal. Yep. Free and Equal. Thank you. And we met them at Free and Equal. Now, I don't necessarily have a lot in common with socialists. Not socialists. What am I talking about? Libertarians. We did see socialists there, but it's the libertarians that we hung out with. So there's some difference there, but reasonable arguments. I mean, we saw them on the debate stage. I would absolutely be very interested to see some of those voices on that stage, to shut them out by some measure of, or some efforts to say, well, we really only have these two guys running, is insulting. And more Americans are starting to classify themselves as independent voters. So what did you just tell them? That it's a foregone conclusion, it's just these two guys. So the system now feeds into, when I say the system, I mean both parties. And I would be stunned. Go ahead, I'm going to put my conspiracy hat on here for a second. We probably should get some music for that. But would it really shock you if both parties just sort of had a conversation, say, hey, let's just knock this out. Let's just do this. We both don't want to deal with any external threats. Let's have our showdown and get it started. I think the third and final part that stood out to me is June 27th is a long time before November. If you are someone on that stage who has some major guffaws, you got to own that for several months. Part of the reason that the debates take place so much closer to the election is that you don't allow citizens and voters to marinate too long on these things that are said. Now, if something goes sideways for either candidate at that debate, you're going to have to do some groundwork to really make up for that. But it doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't sit well with me, and it really calls into question, I think, some parts of our electoral system. When you start to throw this together and say, well, let's just jump ahead. Like, that's the cynic in me I had all kinds of just my spidey sense going off when I saw that.
Yeah. I think for me, again, I'm glad first off that they're debating, but like we mentioned before, there's a committee on presidential debates that does this, and they have a requirement set in place. So you have to meet a minimum 15% in 4 national polls of registered or likely voters. So you must be receiving that, at least that much support. Obviously, both these candidates have that. And the reason why I was mentioning about that number is because that is where RFK nationally is closing in on that. He's like around 13%. Again, whether or not Nick and I agree with his platform is not the case. The case is, if you're going to do an unconventional, end around, and you call an audible and do this in front of a studio with no studio audience, and do it before the conventions, well, then you should be including other people that are going to be on the ballot should they gain ballot access come this fall. Because there are, again, and we've pointed to this poll before, Nick, 60% of Americans, or 62%, I believe it was, did not want a rematch between Trump or Biden. Okay. That's not me saying that. That was a poll that said that, a national poll from, I think it was New York Times, Siena College, that had that number. And this was a few months ago. Okay. So it wasn't recent, but I think the sentiment still carries. And the reason I'm saying that is because if you tally up percentage wise right now in some polls of what Cornel West, Jill Stein, and RFK have numbers wise, they're garnering total around 20% total right now between the three of them. 20% of, look, 157 million people voted in 2020. What's 20% of that, my friend? That's 31 million people. So 31 million people are saying, I'm not going to vote for either of these guys, and I'd rather vote for one of these other folks. Well, then you got to have these other folks on here. Again, if you're doing it in this format, like Nick said, unconventionally, then make it a true process right now and have the debates, which is why we've invited the candidates over at the Free and Equal Elections Foundation to the debate on July 11th. One quick thing before we go to the break here in our interview with Nick, because we touch a lot with the other Nick about this, but let's talk a little bit about the campaign, because I just mentioned that the first debate is going to be happening June 27th in Atlanta. Sounds like the president's going to be in Georgia a lot. We know how close the margin of victory was in Georgia in 2020. He was this past weekend giving the commencement speech at Morehouse College, historical Black college. We know I did a segment earlier today, Nick, on TV about Black voters and Latino voters, how both of these guys are going to be trying to court this group. Support for former President Trump has started to gain a little bit more in the Black community, specifically with younger Black males, according to a recent New York Times Ipsos Siena College poll that shows nationally Trump could get 18% of the Black vote, which is like 7-8 percentage points higher than what he got in 2020. What do you make of President Biden first, the Morehouse College commencement speech? Because I said this before, I'm not crazy about sitting members of Congress, sitting members of the House, sitting presidents giving a commencement speech. And you and I, Rutgers University did this 2016. Barack Obama was still president of the United States. He gave the commencement address at Rutgers. Again, whether or not I voted for him is irrelevant. I don't think those type of speeches are for that. But again, I get why the university would do it, to bring the attention and what it did. And it was actually a really good speech. Go check it out over on YouTube. But what do you make of him giving the commencement speech at a historical Black college where I just mentioned he's struggling with Black voters? At least it appears, in terms of more of them are in the younger demo are more likely to vote for Trump, or maybe not vote for him. And then he did an event. He was at a campaign stop for Arthur Blank, the owner of the Falcons, did an event for him. Stacey Abrams was there. He's obviously trying to rally the support. He's going to be doing the first debate down there in Georgia. What does it say to you? You're the Democrat. What does it say to you about President Biden right now trying to hit some of these states where the margins were really, really small? And Trump is over here for some reason doing an event in the Bronx where he lost New York by millions of votes. Am I losing my mind here, Nick? What is going on here?
Yeah, I think it's pandering. I saw that. You have to understand, not you, I mean, the audience has to understand the significance of Morehouse College. You know, it is the school that Dr. King attended. As a historically Black college, I think it's got to be weird as a student body to listen to an old white guy get up there and talk to you.
Yep.
The optics of it just look weird to me. And honestly, there's a bigger conversation we could be having about this, and maybe at some point we do. I feel like sometimes Democrats do this. They try to position themselves as, well, we are sympathetic to Black people. And yet I think it looks cheap. That was my reaction to it when I saw it over the weekend, and I texted you about it. There's work to be done in Georgia for sure. Giving a speech, I don't think is enough. I think it is important about why would Georgia swing one way or the other. I mean, they voted for a Democrat in 2020. What made them do so? Well, part of it is obviously the aversion to Donald Trump, but what is the needs of Georgians? And if you are trying to repair your standing with the Black community, is it really about giving speeches at a college? Or is it about speaking to issues that Black people really care about? If he's losing votes, and not if, he is, well, what is it about him and his stance that is alienating some Black voters? Maybe you do some work on that. Simply showing up at the college and going ahead and giving a speech, what did you think you were going to convince people of? Well, I'm here, I'm going to rattle off stuff. And I remember, and I think I saw a clip of the speech, and he said something about his record, like, look at the facts. And like, this is not time to campaign. Like, you could be at town halls, you could be at churches, you could be talking to community groups, listening. When you give a commencement speech, that's the one thing you're not doing, or any speech. You're not listening. And I think that's where the president is having a problem right now. And I think a gesture like that, I think insulting is a strong word for it, but it definitely doesn't feel genuine. And as far as Trump and the Bronx, it's the same type of effort. Who does he think he's going to, pull in? The numbers bear out, and I've said this to you in text for a while now, and I've said that Black men similar to white women will be the battleground for voters in this election. It certainly was with white women in 2016, 53% of which voted for Donald Trump. And that's despite the Access Hollywood video and all that stuff. I don't think that gesture won him any votes. If anything, I think people who are on the fence about Biden may have looked at that and felt the same way I did, which is, yeah, this is empty. This feels hollow. And it's insulting. There is, I am going to use that word, because you decided to use the school that Dr. King attended, helped to make famous, as what? As a way of like, Black people, I'm here for you. There's much better ways, more effective ways to demonstrate your support of Black people than simply appearing at a predominantly Black college to talk at them and not listen to them.
Ooh, we got to leave it right there. I mean, that's how you land the plane, folks. Years of co-piloting experience there. I let them come in for a landing. Well, you can go check out the president's speech for yourself. You can go check it out over on YouTube. I do want to say before we go to the break, I was recently on the Santita Jackson program. If you don't know who Santita Jackson is, she's obviously the daughter of the legendary Reverend Jesse Jackson. She hosts a radio show up in Minnesota. And she had me on the show to kind of talk about the debates themselves and what we're doing over at Free and Equal. And I got to listen to a couple of young Black voters that are in a couple different states respectively. And, these folks were very adamant that they can't side with President Biden because of what's happening with Israel and Gaza. Now, again, and my question was, is this your single issue? Is this the issue that will carry with you until November? And their answer was very simple. Yes, because there is no end in sight for what's happening in the Middle East. And so, unfortunately, to Nick's point, the president's got to start listening to this coalition of younger voters, especially ones that are Black and brown, because they're the ones that are going to be pivotal come November. All right, we leave it there. When we come back after the break, Nick Troiano, like I mentioned, the executive director over at Unite America, and he wrote this book, like I mentioned, The Primary Solution, Rescuing Our Democracy from the Fringes. Nick, when we come back after the break. Nick, quick break from the pod because this episode is presented by our friends over at SeatGeek. Your next best night ever is waiting, my friend, and they've got the tickets. You want to go to an NBA game, an NFL game, a concert, Major League Baseball, whatever it is, all you got to do is go to SeatGeek.com. You're going to enter in the promo code Can We Please Talk, and you're going to get $20 off that purchase right now at SeatGeek. Nick, what are you going to do with your $20 off on those tickets, buddy?
I mean, that saves me on anything. I can get food at the game. I can just get the tickets themselves. I mean, baseball's coming along, so I'm excited for that. I can get upper deck tickets and just nothing. And then just all I got to do is worry about food. I mean, anywhere I want to use this, it's well worth it. $20 is a worthwhile investment.
That's right. And I've seen you at sporting events. You eat a lot. Nick needs those $20 off. So go to SeatGeek.com right now. Enter in the promo code Can We Please Talk. You're going to get $20 off that purchase. Nick, today's episode is presented as always by our friends over at Fresh Roasted Coffee. Since 2009, their passion has always been bringing you gourmet coffees from all over the world, roasted fresh to order. I got my coffee snob here, Nick Severi. Nick, tell these people, coffee snob it up here. Tell these people why Fresh Roasted Coffee is so good and why they're the official sponsor of Can We Please Talk.
You know, often the best cup of coffee that you're ever going to have is the one you can make from home. And you need good quality coffee to do that. And that's what Fresh Roasted Coffee offers. You know, between single origin, between blends, flavors, anything on the coffee spectrum they've got. But more importantly, and I can't stress this enough, often when you purchase coffee, you don't know where to start. I mean, there's so many different varieties, so many different opportunities, so many different things you could choose from. And Fresh Roasted Coffee just gives you a very simple questionnaire and just says, hey, figure out what your coffee cup is. Figure out what blend works for you. I've gotten some single origin recommendations, so has Mike, and that's influenced everything. And what they recommend, you can get in a Keurig cup, the way Mike takes it. You can take it in the way I do it, which is typically through a French press, or you can get it for a percolator. Whatever coffee machine you've got, they've got you covered. But more importantly, just a huge variety and a way to learn more about coffee itself.
And all of this is available at freshroastedcoffee.com on their site. 1 cup is all it takes to fall in love with Fresh Roasted Coffee, but you get a discount for being a listener of Can We Please Talk. Enter in the promo code Can We Please Get 20 to get 20% off your first purchase. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com today. All right, here to talk to us a little bit about this incredible book that got sent over to us from the good folks over at Unite America. He's the executive director of Unite America, but also the author of The Primary Solution, Rescuing Our Democracy from the Fringes. If you see it here on video, if you're watching us on YouTube, first off, it's a great title already. I've been trying to save America from the fringes for forever. Nick Troiano joins us here on the pod. Mike and Nick, how are you doing, my friend? Thanks for hopping on with us.
Excellent, thanks. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, you know, Nick, it's really good to talk to you. So let's start at a high level here because there's a lot to get into. Obviously, the book I just mentioned and now Unite America. I want to learn a little bit more about what you guys are doing over there. But let's start first with the book because there was a quote in the book as I was reading this the other day, and it said, one statement Americans can agree with, it's that our political system is broken. I mean, that is the Captain Obvious of all time statements. But I want now Nick Troiano to explain for us, A, what made you write the book, and what does the primary solution, this book, offer for folks about how to solve your problem, about how America's political system is broken?
Well, I think most Americans don't need any convincing that the current system isn't working out well right now. You look at any major national challenge, and we're mired in gridlock. I mean, our democratic institutions themselves have come under attack. And so the question is why? And then what do we do about that? And the answer that I write about in the book is that we don't just have a politician problem, we have an incentive problem, meaning the way that we elect our leaders rewards them for being extreme and saying crazy things and doing crazy things. And if we want less of that, well, we should stop rewarding that, instead reward folks that are actually there to do their job, which is to work with each other and actually solve problems. The biggest solvable problem in our political system right now, I argue, is our system of party primaries. I mean, they're the election that's the whole ballgame in most of the districts in our country because there's not a lot of competition in November, right? These elections are decided in low turnout party primaries where a lot of independents, millions of them, can't vote. And those who do tend to be, more on the fringe of the left and right. So ultimately, it produces a Congress that does not represent the people and is not, incentivized to actually get anything done. If we want to change that, the main argument in the book is we should abolish party primaries. We invented them a little over a century ago. They were fine for a period of time. They're not today. It's time to take sort of the next step on our evolutionary journey of how do we do elections in our country to best elect folks that represent most of us.
Nick, to that end, I think about a representative like Charlie Dent. So I live in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania. Now, Charlie was not our representative, but in a nearby district, obviously one of the more vocal voices against the former president, and eventually just chose not to run for office. The wondering I have about your model and what you talked about in the book is that the idea of trying to pull, democracy, really American democracy, away from the fringes. But when we think of, Charlie Dents and we think of more moderates on either side, they seem to be leaving office. Does the ideas that you're proposing in your book potentially help to bring back more moderate voices? And also, the second thing that comes to mind too is this seems like a fairly recent trend. From the Tea Party in 2010, we've seen more outspoken voices, both on the right and left. So is this a recent trend, or are there deeper seeds that have been sown here?
What I read about in the book, to your last question, is that in the last 20 years, we have seen a dramatic increase in the modern phenomena that is getting primaried, right? Primary used to be a noun. That's what the parties did to choose their standard bearer. Primarying is what activists within the parties have come to weaponize in order to administer sort of purity tests within the primaries. Do you align with us 100% on these particular issues or not? And if you don't, we're going to run someone against you in your next primary. The fear of being primaried is what is the overriding dynamic that influences congressional behavior. People are rational, and the very rational thing to do is, when you're in office, is to want to stay in office. And if the pathway of staying in office is to make sure that you get through your next primary because you're not worried about the November election, that explains the dysfunction in the system today. That's why people like a Charlie Dent or a Jeff Flake or others decide to retire from office, is because they know that ain't sustainable, governing in the way they do and being able to get through their next primary. And so some of them retire before they're, forced to retire. Changing this system allows, I think, people who are governing minded to not only stay in office, but it opens pathways for people who are governing minded to run for office in the first place. I think there are so many Americans right now who look at our political system who might want to get involved and be civically minded and in a position of elected leadership that don't see a pathway through either party primary, and so they stay out. I think we can change it. States have changed it, and the result of changing it is not necessarily moderation, but just better representation to get people in office who can represent a true majority of their voters.
Well, I want to stay on that for a second, Nick, because there was something, a stat in the book here, and it also kind of fed into the MTG AOC of politics that you kind of touch on in the introduction of the book, because Nick and I have mentioned this on the show, and Nick, obviously, Nick Saveri, has mentioned this a bunch, right? In terms of like, look at how vocal both of those figures are, and both of them deeply red, deeply blue states that there are districts, I should say, that they're both are a part of. So I want you, for a moment of literacy for our audience here. The stat that you guys kind of gave in the book was about only 8% of voters who cast ballots in the partisan primaries determined 83% of the current makeup of the U.S. House of Representatives. I mean, I'm not a math major, so that's not great. But can you kind of explain a little bit of that number that you guys have? I've seen it on the Unite America website. I've seen it, obviously, in your book. You guys hammered this point home, but explain a little bit more about this for our audience.
Sure, I'll break that down. 83% of congressional seats are overwhelmingly lopsided for Democrats or Republicans. Some of that has to do with the way the district lines are drawn and gerrymandering, but most of it is because of our own geographic sorting, right? More urban areas are going to be more liberal and Democratic. The opposite is true, more rural areas. So 83% of seats not decided in November, but decided in the primary. And then 8% is the number of voters who cast ballots in the party primary that wound up dictating the outcome of those districts. So that's how you get 8% of people electing 83% of Congress. So if you're ever sitting around and wondering, why doesn't Congress do X, Y, or Z when a majority of Americans want them to? Well, it's because Congress is not elected by a majority of us. It's the 8%. Who are, what are some outcomes when you look at that at a district level? I give the example of AOC and MTG, two people within their party that have commanded a lot of attention and influence. When you look at their first elections, They both represent safe districts. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a safe blue district, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, a safe red district. And they both got into office with fewer than 10% of eligible voters in their district casting ballots in the primary that mattered. That says a lot, I think, about the way that not only they got elected, but the influence they've had within their parties since then. And there's nothing wrong about being anywhere on the political spectrum, but we should want our leaders to actually represent a majority. That's what our system is built on, but it's not what we're getting today.
Nick, in the book you gave an interesting example about Louisiana. And I forget if it was this particular state, but you mentioned Louisiana in great detail. And you'd also given the example of what would be considered a conservative Democrat, one who's not necessarily completely opposed to access of guns. So explain for us just what an example like Louisiana represents in terms of, how there's an opportunity to do better by systems and the changes you're proposing.
So Louisiana is one of 5 states right now that do not use traditional party primaries to nominate or winnow down a candidate field before the general election. And Louisiana is most unique because it's the only state that abolished primaries altogether, which means in Louisiana, there is a general election that has all the candidates. And if no candidate receives a majority support, there is a runoff election a few weeks later. The new governor is trying to change that after 50 years of the system serving the state well, but nonetheless, that's the system it has. And what that has enabled is Democrats and Republicans to run for office who might not look like the types of Democrats and Republicans that would survive a party primary in any other state, but do a better job of representing a majority. That could look like a John Bel Edwards, who was the 2-term governor before, the one I write about in my book. He is pro-life, he is pro-gun. That's a recipe that you won't see successful in a Democratic primary anywhere else, but it's representative of where most Louisianans are. Same thing with Bill Cassidy, for example, one of the more bipartisan members of Congress, even voting to convict former President Trump in his impeachment trial. Those things don't happen in other states, and it's largely because of Louisiana's unique election system. And what I write about in the book as well is it is the only Deep South state that has expanded Medicaid. And whether you agree with that or not, what is true is that that's a policy that's popular with a majority of Louisianans, and it had a direct impact on health outcomes. So these are, in many cases, like real life or death decisions of public policy that are impacted by whether government is truly representative of the people or not.
Nick, I'd be remiss if, for folks watching on YouTube right now, they don't see over your shoulder. It says country over party. We've heard that. Obviously, Representative Adam Kinzinger has said that to us before on this show. So I'm curious about the work you guys are doing over at Unite America. You can go check them out at uniteamerica.org. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about what the foundation is doing? Because it kind of ties in, obviously, perfectly with what you're talking about with the book and in terms of the political fringes and trying to get us back more into this radical centralism, as Olivia Troy once told me. So tell us a little bit more about Unite America.
Well, this is a transition. The book is not an academic exercise for me. It is making an argument for what we need to do in a very practical and tangible way in abolishing party primaries. And so Unite America as an organization has that mission. We're a philanthropic venture fund that is building a cross-partisan donor community in order to raise and then allocate financial resources to help invest at the state level campaigns, be they legislative campaigns or ballot initiatives, to help change policy around the country. Because the great thing is to make progress on this issue, you don't need a constitutional amendment. You don't need an act of Congress. Every state has it within its purview to advance these reforms. And so we're proud to be supporting local organizations, nonpartisan organizations in 24 states that are working towards this goal in some way. And 2024 is a big year because 7 states are pursuing ballot initiatives to give voters the ability to enact the system that we talk about in their state. Alaska was the first state to adopt what we call our sort of North Star policy of a top 4 primary and instant runoff. They adopted it in 2020. You could see over a half dozen states follow suit this year. Not all will get on the ballot, not all will succeed. But it's been, before Alaska, it was close to a decade between that and the prior state that abolished its party primaries. So as they say, change happens slowly and then all at once. And I think we're beginning to see this inflection point for the primary reform movement.
Well, Nick, I'm sold. So I will continue to, pound the pavement in Pennsylvania to do that work. But at the same time, though, on the subject of Congress, I do have to inevitably bring us to what's happening at the White House, or at least the pursuit of the White House. So recently, CNN, of course, announced there will be a debate beginning as early as June, which to anyone familiar with conventions comes before both the Democratic and Republican convention. So, Nick, that brings me to then asking you, is there a larger problem in hand about our political system? We've been talking about how to reform Congress, but is something that's sitting with you the one, or at least it is with me, the wondering if our structured democracy is potentially at risk because of just this rush to the fringe and this what almost seems like just a very tribalistic approach to who we want as our elected officials.
Yes, and when you look at the presidential race this year, it's reflective of this primary problem. We're ultimately being served up two candidates from the major two parties that most Americans don't want to see a rematch between. And it's because the system is anti-competitive in many ways. There are large barriers to entry for anyone else, not just in the primary system. Ask Dean Phillips what it was like to even try to get on the ballot in the Democratic primary, but in the general election, right? The debates that were just announced by demand of the two major party candidates will exclude any other third party candidate, even if they're on the ballot in sufficient states to win electoral college majority. On Twitter yesterday, I called it a sham and a shame, and someone replied saying, it is that, and it is also not a surprise. And I think that was well said, because this is, reflective of a true duopoly, which is protecting its power at all costs, even if they're a declining share of voters, right? Most voters in America right now are not Democrats or Republicans, they're independents. And so the system as it's currently constructed is not sustainable, not just for our country, but either for the political parties. They either have to adapt, or one or both are going to find themselves on the wrong side of wherever the American people are, and won't be around for long. So I think there's an incentive from the major parties to address this issue in a more proactive way than they are right now.
Well, Nick, before we let you go, there was a quote in your book. We started with the book. We're going to end with the book, because there's a quote from Michael Smerconish, who I happen to know, obviously the CNN anchor on one of our favorites here. He said, elections are more about motivation and less about persuasion. And this is a direct quote from your book. And I've kind of heard this phrase as I've been doing some more political punditry across the TV sector. I even heard this from Bakari Sellers about this. This election is really the ballot box versus the couch, people staying home. So for people that are home right now listening to this, what would be your message to them about getting involved in the political process, whether it be with Unite America, the aims and goals of what they're trying to do? Nick was just mentioning about what he wants to do in Pennsylvania. So what would be your message to folks out there about, exercising their right to vote and what it is that you guys are doing in the political process overall?
Yeah, I'd say that to them, that they're not just a customer of this system as a voter, they're a shareholder, like you own it. And if we're not satisfied with the status quo, the good thing is our Constitution gives us the tools to change it. And that's not just an opportunity, but an obligation. We're doing something quite unnatural in the human experience for this great American experiment going on close to 250 years of what it means to self-govern. And we can't take that for granted. That is not guaranteed. It has to be earned by every generation and improved upon. We've luckily inherited a system that still gives us the tools to improve it, and we should while we still have the time, because it is not inevitable that we will always have the same rights and opportunities as we do today. So I hope that people get engaged. There are groups like Open Primaries and Fair Vote and Represent Us that are engaged at the state level. If you go to uniteamerica.org, you can see that list of partner organizations, as well as any of the campaigns in your state. In PA, there's a great group called Ballot PA, which is working to open the elections to the million independent voters who can't vote right now. And chances are there's one in your state. So I would encourage you to get involved. You can be involved in politics without being involved for a candidate or a party. You can be involved by trying to fix the system itself.
Boy, that's a soundbite right there if I've ever heard one. Nick Troiano, like I mentioned, uniteamerica.org. Go check out the book wherever books are sold right now. It's called The Primary Solution, Rescuing Our Democracy from the Fridges. Can't thank you enough, Nick, for hopping on the program today. Continued success to you, and please stay safe.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it, Nick. Thanks, Mike.
All right, our thank yous again to Nick Troiano for coming on the program, Executive Director over at uniteamerica.org. Go check out the site. Go check out his book, The Primary Solution, Rescuing Our Democracy from the Fringes. It's out now wherever books are sold. Our thank you to him. If you want to watch the video portion of our interview with Nick or any of the interviews we've done on the show, head over to our YouTube channel, type in Can We Please Talk Podcast. We should pop right up. Audio podcast platforms, you know them by now, Apple, Spotify, Google. Shout out to everybody listening to us over on Good Pods. YouTube Music. Shout out to Acast, our hosting platform. We can't do it without them. Can't do it without each and every one of you that listens to this program. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And I'm Nick Severi.
We'll see everybody next time.